Hello, and welcome back to the Loco Files. In today's episode, we'll be looking at the LBSCR A-Class. The London, Brighton and South Coast Railway A-Class is a class of British 060 steam locomotive. Designed by William Stroudley, 50 members of the class were built in 1872 and between 1874 and 1880, all at Brighton Works. The class has received several nicknames, initially being known as Routers by their South London crews. However, the engines are more commonly referred to as Terriers, on account of their distinctive bark of the exhaust beat. Later in their careers, some engines were known as Hailing Billy, on account of their work on the Hailing Island branch line. The class was successful and saw use with a multitude of operators up to 1963, when the Hailing Island branch was closed. Fortunately, 10 members of the class have survived into preservation, and most can be found on heritage lines in the UK, with one more being overseas in Canada. When Stroudley came to office for the LBSCR in the beginning of 1870, he found a situation where there was very little in the way of standardisation among the loco stock of the LBSCR. He perceived the need for a small range of standard locos, and in the following 15 years produced such a range of some 8 or so. Originally known as the A-Class, these diminutive tank engines were designed in 1870 to haul commuter trains on the heavily congested lines in South and South East London. These included routes from London Bridge to both East and West Croydon, London Victoria to Sutton, and the line from Victoria to London Bridge via Peckham Rye and Denmark Hill, as well as operating on the East London Railway under the Thames through the Thames Tunnel designed by Mark Isambard Brunel. The first batch of Terriers was started in 1872, and the building programme lasted until 1880. 6 locomotives were built for these services during 1872, and were successful thanks to their high acceleration between the closely spaced station stops and use of lightweight trains. A further 44 were built between June 1874 and September 1880 to complement the original 6. The Terriers was so successful that more were built than were actually needed for the London area, so their migration to the country parts of the LBSCR started. The locomotives were finished in a livery known as Stroudley's Improved Engine Green, which was actually an ochre colour, not green. The actual shade of the livery has been heavily disputed, with opinions ranging from more of a yellow type of livery to a livery closer to brown, as worn by the model named Como in the Brighton Toy and Model Museum. As time passed, the track work in the London area was improved, and the suburban traffic became heavier. Soon, more powerful locos were needed for these trains, and the dispersal of the Terriers was made to most outlying sheds of the LBSCR, as most of them had local services of the kind that suited the diminutive Terriers well. Shortly after construction, number 40 Brighton was chosen by William Stroudley to represent the LBSCR at the Paris exhibition of 1878, and won a gold medal for workmanship on a run from Dieppe to Paris, arranged to persuade the Chemin de Fer de l'Est that the company's boat trains that met the LBSCR ferries from New Haven could make better time to the capital. Brighton maintained a speed of nearly 50 miles per hour, previously unheard of on that line. During the last 2 decades of the 19th century, London was expanding outwards as suburbs became more built up and were absorbed into the built-up area of London itself. Towns such as Croydon, Sutton and Norwood, which had previously been commuter towns separate from London, grew to form one large area of housing. Much of this has been attributed to the success of the Terriers themselves, as they sped up suburban passenger services, encouraging people to move out of the centre of London. The trains became progressively heavier, while the need for shorter journey times remained the same. As a result, the engines gradually became largely unsuited for their original work, and they were replaced by the larger D1 class tank engines. However, the Terriers were so reliable that they were put on other work, often finding use on branch line passenger and freight workings, as well as shunting engines. After displacement from their original workings out of London Bridge and Victoria by more powerful locomotives from the D1 class and the early stages of the LBSCR overhead electrification scheme, some representatives of the class were sold to other operators, while the majority of the remainder were put to work on branch lines in Sussex and on non-revenue earning work such as shunting. They were known to reach speeds of up to 60 miles per hour, which is rather impressive considering their size. In total 50 were built, and by the end of the 19th century the need for so many had been reduced. Not only that, but after 30 years of intensive working, many of these small engines were literally worn out, and a proportion was scrapped in the first few years of the 20th century, with several sold off. 23 members of the class were withdrawn between 1898 and 1905, but the majority of these was sold in working order rather than scrap. Purchasers of these locomotives included the New Haven Harbour Company, the Isle of Wight Central Railway purchasing 4 locomotives, Pauling & Co. buying 5 locomotives, the Kent and East Sussex Railway acquiring 2 locomotives, the London and South Western Railway bought 2, and the South Eastern and Chatham Railway securing 1. Others were transferred from capital to departmental non-revenue earning stock, as pilots at Brighton Locomotive Works and Lancing Carriage Works. It is likely that the remainder of the class would have been withdrawn over the subsequent few years if the railway had not adopted push-pull or motor train workings on many lightly used branch lines. The A1 class, as designated after 1905, were found ideally suited for conversion to this form of working. It was proposed to scrap the rest, but with the introduction of motor trains, the Terriers found a new lease of life. For this use, new boilers were fitted and other modifications carried out, and so the Terrier became the A1X. Others had been sold to private industrial users and other railways over the previous 10 years or so. This included 2 to the LSWR for use on the Lyme Regis branch, and the South Eastern and Chatham, and 2 lesser lines. With these new uses being found, the class remained in use on the system, surviving to be taken into ownership by the Southern Railway in 1923 and by British Railways in 1948. Between 1911 and 13, 12 survivors were reboilered under the instruction of Douglas Earl Marsh, Stroudley's successor as CME of the LBSCR, with another 4 so treated after the Great War. These engines formed the A1X class, with an increased weight of 28.7 tonnes. Other changes made during the rebuilding were the extension of the smokebox, removing the smokebox wings and moving the sandboxes from this same area, where they formed a forward extension of the leading driving wheel splasher to below the running plate, although some Locos rebuilt later retained the original sandboxes. The tube, which had been used as part of the original condensing arrangement between the smokebox and side tank, was also removed. The engines were repainted during this time into marsh umber livery. 5 locomotives were bought by the British government in 1918 and sent to Scotland to work at the US Navy's North Sea Mine Barrage mine laying project at Inverness and Dalmore, near Invergordon. The facilities were built by the Admiralty using distillery sites, but administered by the US Navy. The locomotives were numbers 37 Southdown, 79 Minories, 89 Bula, and 83 Earlswood at Dalmore, and 38 Millwall, which was used at Glenalbyn, Inverness. Numbers 38, 81 and 83 later went on to the Shropshire and Montgomeryshire Railway. 15 of the class remained in LBSCR stock at the formation of the Southern Railway on the 1st of January 1923, but this figure was increased to 24 by the inclusion of those which had previously been sold to other constituent railways. Several examples were withdrawn over the next few years, and 2 were sold to the Western Clevedon and Portishead Railway in 1925 and 37. As with the withdrawals under the LBSCR, the engines were not withdrawn en masse, but instead over a long period of time. The first A1X to be withdrawn by the Southern Railway was number 42 Tulse Hill in 1925, and among the engines withdrawn was the now famous number 55 Stepney, which only escaped being scrapped by virtue of the need for lighter engines on Hayling Island. The 2 locomotives, numbers 43 Gypsy Hill and number 53 Ashstead, sold to the Western Clevedon and Portishead Railway in 1925 and 37, were renumbered number 2 Portishead and number 4 respectively. On the closure of that line in 1940, both locomotives entered service with the Great Western Railway as number 5 Portishead and number 6, and survived into BR ownership. Number 5 was scrapped in May 1954 and number 6 in 1948. Many of the locomotives remained in traffic, both departmental and in regular stock. They lasted longer than most classes of pre-grouping tank engine under the Southern Railway, primarily due to the presence of several light railways which came under the Southern Railway's jurisdiction at the grouping, such as the lines from Tenderton and Hayling Island, as well as on the Isle of Wight. Most of these lines needed small engines such as the Terrier class due to severe weight restrictions. Among the engines transferred into departmental use was the former number 82 Box Hill, which was restored to original condition, painted in the yellow ochre livery of Stroudley and used as a shunter at Brighton Works, being numbered 380S and named after the works itself. This engine was replaced by 377S, formerly number 35 Morden, in 1948. Although much photographed towards the end of steam, this locomotive was not preserved, but was scrapped at Eastleigh in 1963. With the Southern Railway concentrating on the design of larger locomotives for the increasingly heavy express passenger traffic on the southeastern and southwestern sections, with designs such as the King Arthur, Schools and Lord Nelson classes, and later on the Bullied Pacifics, as well as the expansion of the electrified third rail system, from the suburban rails, replacing the LBSCR overhead electrification program. The company was not concerned about replacing the veteran tank engines on branch line workings, especially as many of the smaller branch lines were not economically viable for electrification or were isolated from the rest of the electrified network. As a result, the Southern Railway felt that the perseverance with the older locomotives such as the A1X on rural routes was the most economically viable option. Their numbers dwindled following the Second World War, as the work they were used for was either dieselised or lost to rail through the closure of branch lines and yards. At nationalisation in 1948, 1 A1 and 14 A1X locomotives entered British Railway stock. All but one of these locomotives were based on the former Southern Railway, which became the Southern Region under British Railways, with the other based on the Western Region, having been inherited by the Great Western. BR gave these locomotives the power classification 0P, indicating that the locomotives were primarily passenger locomotives, but were among the least powerful in the system. The locomotives remained employed much as they had been under Southern Railway ownership, with roles centred on working over the lightly laid and weight-restricted branch lines. However, the class were becoming increasingly expensive to maintain through physical wear and increased age of components. The future of the class was thrown into doubt with the publication of the modernisation plan, which made provision to close many of the routes still operated by the class. The main two routes still retaining Terrier operation were the Kent and East Sussex Railway and the Hayling Island branch. The former closed due to being unprofitable in 1961. The line to Hayling Island remained profitable, however, primarily due to heavy traffic in the summer. Unfortunately, the condition of the bridge over Langstone Harbour was deteriorating, and the Southern Region designated the bridge as beyond economic repair. The final scheduled service over the line was run on the 3rd of November 1963, and a special, topped and tailed by 32636 and 32670 the following day. The final scheduled train was notable for being one of the last steam-hauled mixed trains. With the closure of this line, BR decided it was time to withdraw the last remaining members of the class from traffic. At the time of her withdrawal, following the closure of the line, number 32636, formerly 72 Fenchurch, was the oldest working steam engine in British Railways ownership. 10 members of the class have been preserved, chiefly in the south of England, with the exceptions being Wadden, who is in Canada, and Box Hill, who is in the National Railway Museum at York. Number 55 Stepney, as number 32655, was the first engine to arrive at the first standard gauge preserved line in the UK, the Bluebell Railway, on the 17th of May 1960, effectively making it an ambassador of the Heritage Railway movement. Following purchase by the fledgling society, the locomotive was run under its own steam from Brighton Shed to Halstead Keynes, hauling the two carriages the society also now owned. The locomotive then went on to haul the reopening train in August of that year. Number 72 Fenchurch was purchased by the Bluebell Railway in 1964. After much initial use, the locomotive was retired for overhaul in 1970, and returned to traffic in 1972 for its centenary. However, it was withdrawn in 1975, and with a new firebox, re-entered service in 1980, running until 1988. At its next overhaul, the need to replace one pair of the original wrought iron wheels due to the detection of cracks in the wheel hub meant the locomotive was not returned to traffic until 2001. Although carrying an A1X boiler, the smokebox was rebuilt during that overhaul to such an extent that it now looks very similar to its original A1 form. Number 82 Box Hill was restored by the Southern Railway to original condition, and it remained an A1, not having been rebuilt as an A1X and used at exhibitions, before being moved into the original British Transport Museum in Clapham. It was subsequently moved to the museum at York, where it still resides. Also preserved in a national museum is number 54 Walden, which was donated by British Rail to the Canadian Railway Museum in 1963 and shipped on the 23rd of August that year. After a number of years, 3 British expats living in Ottawa formed a small group to work on the locomotive, which had been in storage but never outdoors, and restore it to pristine condition. Walden was also not rebuilt as an A1X, having been fitted with an SECR boiler after being sold to that railway, but it was later fitted and now carries an A1X boiler while retaining the shorter A1 type smokebox. 3 members of the class were sold by British Rail to Butlins for display at their holiday camps. Number 40 Brighton, now Newport, was sent to Butlins Fwilly in 1964 and initially loaned to the Isle of Wight Steam Railway in 1972. It was then sold to them 4 years later for a price of £35,000. A lengthy restoration was completed in 1989, and Newport continued to run until 2002, when withdrawn for overhaul. The locomotive's boiler was found to be life expired, and it was found cheaper to order a new boiler made for £70,000 in 2007. In October 2010, the new boiler was delivered. The locomotive is currently in traffic with its boiler certificate running out this year, 2024. Number 62 Martello was sent to Butlins Head of Air Camp in 1963 and was displayed alongside 46223 Duchess of Sutherland before being loaned and then sold to the museum at Bressingham. The locomotive remained there for several years in a shed before removal and full restoration, which commenced in the late 1990s. In its Marsh Umber livery numbered 662, with LBSC on its tanks, it has visited several heritage railways in the UK since being returned to traffic. In May 2011, it was repainted at Loughborough on the Great Central Railway in BR Black as 32662, with the late BR logo in readiness to join 32670 and 32678 on the Kent and East Sussex Railway for the last train commemoration, which took place on the 11th of June that year. Number 662 also carries the bunker from classmate number W13 Carisbrooke, exchanging bunkers in 1959 when the latter was scrapped. Number 78 Knoll went to Butlins Minehead Camp and was displayed alongside 46229 Duchess of Hamilton before being purchased by the Kent and East Sussex Railway in 1975. The locomotive is now owned by the Terrier Trust. Also owned by the Terrier Trust is number 70 Poplar, which was initially purchased from BR by Wheel Brothers of Brighton in 1964 and was used in the early years of operation on the original Kent and East Sussex Light Railway, as well as on the same line but now as a heritage locomotive. Following withdrawal in 1985, the engine remained out of use for a decade before the Kent and East Sussex Railway and the Terrier Trust bought the locomotive and agreed a restoration plan. It returned to traffic in May 2006 at the All Terriers Great and Small Gala in its original Rother Valley Railway livery of Oxford Blue. In April 2011, it was repainted BR Black as number 36270 with the late BR logo, to feature in the same event that Martello was part of on the 11th of June 2011. Both of these Terriers continue to regularly perform on the Kent and East Sussex. The short trains and light loading gauge make them ideally suited for operating on the line. Number 50 Whitechapel was purchased by the municipal borough of Sutton-on-Cheam in 1963. After the original intended purchase, number 61 Sutton was scrapped. Oh dear. Anyway, the intention was to display the engine outside the new Civic Centre, and the engine was offered a home at the Kent and East Sussex until the work was completed. The engine was restored and used to haul the opening train on the preserved line in 1974. After slipping down the overhaul queue at Rolvenden, the engine was moved to the Spa Valley Railway by the owners of the engine, still being Sutton Borough Council, and restoration work commenced. Number 46 Newington has perhaps the most unusual history. Following withdrawal in 1963, the locomotive was sold to the Sadler Rail Coach Company, based at Droxford, Hampshire, on the disused Meon Valley Railway. It was used on occasion between Droxford and Wickham on that line. Subsequently, it was sold to the Portsmouth-based Brickwoods Brewery in the spring of 1966. The brewery wanted it for use outside a new public house to be opened on Hayling Island, named the Hayling Billy. The engine was displayed there for a number of years, becoming locally famous before being donated to the Isle of Wight Steam Railway in 1979. None of the preserved members of the class have been restored to full mainline running condition, which isn't really surprising, considering they are small, teeny weeny. Some consideration was given to doing so during the restoration of number 62 Martello in the early years of the 21st century, in order to facilitate the appearance of the engine at open days and exhibitions in an operational condition. However, the costs involved led to the idea being abandoned. Prior to the end of steam and the banning of steam engines from the national network in 1968, number 55 Stepney worked two special trains over the metals of the southern region. The first trip ran on the 21st of October 1962 and saw number 55 doublehead with London South Western Railway Adams radial tank number 488 on the Haywards Heath to Horsted Keene lines, and return section of a rail tour from London Victoria to the Bluebell Railway. The second train ran from Brighton to Horsted Keynes on the 27th of October 1963 for members of the Bluebell Railway Preservation Society, which saw the locomotive doublehead with another former London, Brighton and South Coast locomotive E4 number 473 Birch Grove, and was run to mark the closure of the line from Haywards Heath to Horsted Keynes. Number 55 returned to Brighton Station in 1999 to mark the 150th anniversary of the opening of the London and Brighton Railway to Brighton. The locomotive was left cold and was coupled to another ex-London, Brighton and South Coast locomotive, Gladstone, and stabled during the day on the easternmost platform, number 9. The engines were the centrepiece of an exhibition which also included, among others, former Southern Railway, King Arthur class number 777, Sir Lamiel, Britannia class number 70,000, Britannia, and BR Standard 4MT number 80072, a class of locomotive built at Brighton. In August 1975, number 72, Fenchurch, represented the London, Brighton and South Coast and the Bluebell Railway at the Rail 150 Steam Cavalcade, held at Shildon in County Durham, an event held to mark the 150th anniversary of the opening of the Stockton and Darlington Railway. This featured the engine running over a section of BR network, although the line was subject to special restrictions at the time. Additionally, the engine ran a number of shuttles into the Wagon Works complex from the railway station, topping and tailing workings with North Eastern Railway Class P3, number 65894 from the North Yorkshire Moors Railway. And a little bit of trivia for you. An A1X class locomotive, Stepney, appears in Stepney, the Bluebell engine, one of the books in the Railway series of children's books written by the Reverend W. Audrey. Box Hill was also later referred to in Thomas and the Great Railway Show. Stepney has also appeared in the television adaptation Thomas the Tank Engine. I'd like to thank you all for watching and listening. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, feel free to throw a like. Let me know some of your favourite memories from the Terriers if you've been behind any on any of our heritage lines in the UK. Once again, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed it, feel free to like and subscribe. Feel free to comment down below. And I'll see you in the next one. Thank you, and goodbye.